Yuji Itadori can now unleash Black Flash whenever he wants. Yuji Itadori can erase an entire city with a single dismantle. Let that sink in. In the latest Jujutsu Kaisen chapter, we witnessed Yuji radiating pure menace, absolutely farming aura, and dropping that otherworldly monster with one casual punch like it was nothing. And that raises a terrifying question. Could this version of Yuji Itadori defeat the honored one, Gojo Satoru? Could he stand above even the King of Curses, Ryomen Sukuna? Today, we're going to break it all down. Because before choosing a winner, we must first dissect the power, abilities, battle IQ, and win conditions of all three fighters. Let's start with our GOAT, Yuji Itadori. Because if we're talking about monsters, gods, and calamities, Yuji belongs at the very top of that conversation. First, we need to address something most people overlook. Yuji is now over 80 years old, yet he shows zero signs of physical decline. No slower reflexes, no weaker strikes, no fatigue. In fact, he's stronger than he has ever been. That's because Yuji no longer ages like a normal human. His body has evolved past biological limitations. He exists in a state of perpetual prime, a vessel that simply keeps refining itself through combat. And that alone already makes him abnormal. But now we move into the truly broken territory. Yuji Itadori can land Black Flash whenever he wants. Let that sink in. Black Flash is not a technique. It is not a move. It is a phenomenon. A distortion in space created when cursed energy is applied within 0.000001 seconds of a physical impact. 1/1,000,000th of a second, miss that window by even a fraction, and Black Flash does not occur. When a sorcerer successfully triggers it, their cursed energy turns black, and the force of their strike skyrockets to the power of 2.5 compared to a normal blow, and that means the damage doesn't just double, it multiplies exponentially, which is why even a single Black Flash can change the outcome of an entire fight. But here's the key detail. Throughout Jujutsu history, no sorcerer has ever been capable of using Black Flash on command. Not Nanami, not Todo, not Gojo Satoru, not even Ryomen Sukuna. They can enter a state where Black Flash becomes more likely. They can get lucky, they can ride momentum, but they cannot decide, I will Black Flash right now. Yuji can. Yuji doesn't wait for alignment, he doesn't gamble, he doesn't hope, he simply does it, which means every single punch Yuji throws can carry Black Flash level output, every exchange, every combo, every barrage. Now imagine that level of amplification stacked on top of Yuji's already monstrous physical strength. That is not a fighter anymore, that is a natural disaster wearing human skin, and somehow, Yuji kept evolving even beyond that. Yuji has now inherited and developed multiple top-tier curse techniques, including Cleave, Dismantle, Fuga, World-Cutting Dismantle, Blood Manipulation. These aren't watered-down copies, these are refined, lethal versions adapted specifically to Yuji's fighting style. We've already seen him actively using Piercing Blood, and when Yuji fires Piercing Blood, it doesn't just pierce flesh. It doesn't just tear through opponents, it obliterates structures. One shot erased an entire building from existence, not damaged, not partially collapsed, gone. And Yuji's reaction? Did I overdo it? That single line tells you everything. Yuji's baseline output has grown so high that city block level destruction feels accidental to him. Now let's talk about Dismantle. When Yuji uses Dismantle, it is not a thin cutting slash, it is not a surgical attack, it is mass erasure. One activation wiped out an entire army of curses in seconds. Another carved a colossal scar straight through Tokyo itself. We're talking about devastation on the same tier as Gojo's Hollow Purple, Sukuna's World-Cutting Slash. Meaning Yuji is now casually wielding attacks that used to be considered ultimate moves. And the scariest part? These are not finishing techniques for him. These are casual options, tools in his kit. Which means Yuji doesn't just dominate in raw stats, he dominates in hand-to-hand combat, cursed energy control, technique variety, battle IQ, experience. At this point, calling Yuji special grade feels insulting. That classification was made for monsters who threaten cities. Yuji is beyond that. Yuji is the kind of existence that reshapes eras, a walking extinction-level threat. And this version of Yuji is the man we're asking to face Gojo Satoru and Ryomen Sukuna. Now, let's talk about the strongest version of Ryomen Sukuna, Heian era Sukuna, at full potential. Now, a lot of fans believe that the Sukuna we saw during the Shinjuku Showdown was already his Heian era form, and technically, they're not entirely wrong. Sukuna did regain his original appearance, he did regain 4 arms, and he did regain a large portion of his former power. But here's the crucial detail that changes everything. Sukuna was still an incarnated sorcerer. He wasn't fighting in a body that was originally his. He was inhabiting Megumi Fushiguro. And the goal of the sorcerers wasn't to erase Sukuna from existence. It was to separate him from Megumi. That means Sukuna was fighting under a completely different condition. Killing Sukuna in his own body, where his soul, cursed energy flow, and physical form are perfectly aligned, is a very different challenge than defeating him while he's bound to a vessel. So when we talk about true Heian-era Sukuna, we're talking about a version with no compatibility issues, no internal resistance, and no limits imposed by another person's body. With that clarified, let's finally break down what Sukuna was truly capable of. Back in the golden age of Jujutsu, the Heian era, Ryomen Sukuna wasn't just feared, he was regarded with awe. This was a time when sorcerers were far more brutal, far more experienced, and far less forgiving than modern Jujutsu society. And even in that era, Sukuna stood above everyone. Thousands of sorcerers challenged him, not amateurs, not rookies. These were fighters who had trained their entire lives specifically to kill him, and they still fell. One of Sukuna's most infamous feats was single-handedly slaughtering the Sun, Moon, and Star Squad, along with the 5 empty generals, the most elite military force of the Fujiwara clan. These weren't just strong sorcerers, they were considered unstoppable, and Sukuna erased them alone. The impact of this massacre was so devastating that the authorities of Japan realized a terrifying truth. They could not defeat him. So instead of opposing Sukuna, they chose to appease him. Festivals were held in his honor. That alone tells you everything about the level of fear he inspired. This is how Sukuna earned the titles the King of Curses and the strongest sorcerer in history. And these titles weren't exaggerations. Even in the modern era, Satoru Gojo, a man whose confidence borders on arrogance, openly acknowledged Sukuna's strength. Gojo didn't say he would easily win. He said the fight would be difficult. That alone places Sukuna in a category almost no one reaches. But Sukuna's power doesn't come from cursed techniques alone. He possesses an absurd amount of cursed energy, but more importantly, his control over it is near perfect. He doesn't waste energy, he doesn't panic, and he understands Jujutsu on a level that feels almost instinctual. On top of that, Sukuna's physical abilities are terrifying. Strength, speed, durability. He can dominate opponents without even revealing his true techniques. He has been shown overwhelming enemies using only raw combat ability, treating high-level sorcerers like toys. Now let's talk about the abilities most people recognize. Sukuna's slashing techniques, dismantle and cleave, are far more dangerous than they appear. These aren't simple attacks, they adapt. Cleave adjusts based on the target's cursed energy and durability, meaning defense alone is never enough. If you're strong, the attack becomes stronger. If you reinforce your body, the slash compensates. And on top of that, Sukuna has demonstrated control over flames, using fire-based attacks for devastating long-range destruction. All of this becomes even more terrifying when paired with Malevolent Shrine, a domain expansion that doesn't trap you inside a barrier. It forces the environment itself to become part of Sukuna's technique. There is no escape. There is no safe zone. You are simply inside his territory. And yet, even with all of this, there's still one thing about Sukuna that remains mysterious, especially for anime-only viewers: his true innate technique. In Jujutsu Kaisen, a sorcerer's entire fighting style revolves around their innate ability. And considering how dominant Sukuna was even without fully revealing it, it's terrifying to imagine what his complete kit looks like when fully unleashed. This is why Sukuna never felt like someone fighting seriously. It always felt like he was holding something back. So when we talk about Heian-era Sukuna at full power, we're not talking about just another villain. We're talking about a being who dominated an entire era, warped history itself, and forced the world to bow rather than resist. And this is the opponent adult Yuji would have to face. Now, let's talk about the strongest version of Gojo. Prime Satoru Gojo, the pinnacle of the modern era. Before we can decide whether Prime Yuji surpassed Gojo, we need to understand one thing very clearly. Satoru Gojo was not just strong. He was the standard. For most of modern jujutsu history, the balance of the entire world revolved around one man. Curses grew stronger because he existed. Enemies planned entire lifetimes just to seal him. Prime Satoru Gojo represents the absolute peak of the modern era, a sorcerer so overwhelming that normal power scaling simply stopped applying around him. 6 eyes and limitless, Gojo's strength begins with a genetic miracle. The combination of limitless and the 6 eyes is something that appears once in generations, and when it does, it reshapes the jujutsu world. The 6 eyes grant Gojo near-perfect perception of cursed energy, atomic-level understanding of space and flow, extreme analytical ability, mid-combat, and most importantly, near-absolute cursed energy efficiency. Because of this, Gojo consumes almost no cursed energy when using techniques. In practice, this gives him pseudo-infinite stamina. Limitless, on the other hand, allows Gojo to manipulate space itself, not metaphorically, but literally at the atomic level. This combination alone already places him beyond conventional sorcerers. Infinity, a defense that redefines combat. Gojo's neutral limitless technique, Infinity, is one of the most broken defensive abilities in the series. Rather than blocking attacks, Infinity prevents them from ever reaching him. Key distance between Gojo and any incoming threat is divided infinitely, making contact mathematically impossible. Unless an opponent can nullify cursed techniques, manipulate space itself, or bypass concepts through domain mechanics, they simply cannot touch him. Infinity turns Gojo into a walking no-hit boss, forcing opponents to fight on his terms or not at all. Physical stats. God tier even without techniques. Despite relying on space manipulation, Gojo is far from physically weak. In fact, his raw physical performance is among the highest in the series. Gojo has toyed with reincarnated Sukuna one-shot special-grade curses, dominated Mahoraga in direct combat, and traded blows evenly with a fully powered Ryomen Sukuna. His punches are reinforced with blue, drastically amplifying impact, allowing him to destroy buildings with shockwaves, knock out Sukuna with black flash, overwhelm opponents who specialize in physical combat. Even without Infinity, Gojo remains a top-tier hand-to-hand fighter. Speed, reaction, and movement. Gojo's speed is absurd. As a teenager, he reacted to Toji, even while exhausted and sleep-deprived. As an adult, his movement reaches another level entirely. Instant repositioning using blue near teleportation movement, after images that confuse even top-tier opponents. He is fast enough to defend himself from Sukuna without even focusing on him while dealing with other threats simultaneously. In terms of reaction speed and mobility, Gojo sits comfortably at the top of the verse. This level of tactical execution places Gojo among the smartest fighters in the series. Reverse curse technique, near perfect healing. Gojo is one of the most advanced reverse curse technique users ever. He constantly refreshes his brain to avoid burnout, heals fatal injuries almost instantly, restores his curse technique after domain usage, and maintains combat readiness far longer than most sorcerers. However, this strength also hides a weakness. Under extreme pressure, Gojo can overstrain his brain, a flaw that ultimately contributed to his defeat. Still, his RCT mastery is among the best ever seen. Black Flash and Combat Flow. Gojo has one of the highest Black Flash success rates in the series. When he lands one, his output skyrockets. His control sharpens, and his reverse curse technique becomes even more efficient. In this state, Gojo operates beyond his normal limits, entering a zone few sorcerers ever experience. Gojo's curse techniques, pure destruction. Blue creates a void in space that forcibly pulls matter toward it. Used for crowd control amplifying. Punches, high-speed movement, internal destruction. Red, the reversed version of blue, a repulsive force that explodes outward with immense power, capable of devastating even Sukuna. Hollow purple. The fusion of blue and red. A technique that erases everything in its path at a molecular level. There are almost no defenses against it. Unlimited void, the strongest domain of the modern era. Gojo's domain expansion, Unlimited Void, overwhelms the target with infinite information. It doesn't attack the body. It attacks the mind. Once caught, thought becomes impossible. Movement stops, resistance collapses. Gojo's control over this domain is so refined that he can activate it for 0.2 seconds, selectively targeting enemies without killing civilians. Let's ask the real question. Has Yuji Itadori truly surpassed Satoru Gojo and Ryomen Sukuna? Not in a hypothetical clash, not in a cinematic matchup, but in terms of overall power, consistency, and ceiling. So let's compare them point by point. So instead of splitting this into endless stat categories, let me give you the honest conclusion. Yes, Yuji Itadori has surpassed both Satoru Gojo and Ryomen Sukuna, and the reasons are actually very simple. First of all, experience. Yuji has spent nearly 68 years fighting non-stop. Real battles, real death matches, real survival, not training simulations, not controlled environments, constant war. And when we look at Yuji in the Modulo chapters, he doesn't feel like a sorcerer anymore. He feels like a calamity, cold, composed, unbothered. Every movement is efficient, every attack is decisive. Second, Black Flash. Yuji can land Black Flash whenever he wants, which means Yuji is effectively in a permanent awakened state, because it has already been stated that when a sorcerer lands multiple Black Flashes, their body and cursed energy output rise to their absolute maximum. Yuji doesn't need to build momentum. Yuji doesn't need to enter the zone. He lives in that state at all times. Neither Gojo nor Sukuna can do that. They are absurdly strong, but they cannot force Black Flash. Yuji can, and that alone already places Yuji's baseline above theirs. So yes, in my opinion, Yuji Itadori has surpassed Satoru Gojo. Yuji Itadori has surpassed Ryomen Sukuna. He stands alone at the top. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. If you disagree, tell me why in the comments. I read everything. I reply to everyone. See you in the next one.